Greetings, salutations. This is Volts for May 29th, 2026. Giving clean electricity a political voice of its own. I'm your host, David Roberts. If you are the kind of person who listens to Volts, you know that we are living through an industrial miracle. Over and over and over again, clean electrification technologies have outstripped even the most optimistic predictions. Solar sets new records every year. Solar and wind comprise the vast majority of what is being built today in power systems worldwide, and almost the entirety of what developers want to build in the future. Virtually every country is moving toward clean electrification, even petrostates like Saudi Arabia. Every day, the technologies involved become cheaper and more sophisticated, opening up even larger potential horizons. It is wild. And if you simply trace the projections forward a decade or two, the implications are so enormous and overwhelming as to defy understanding. This ought to be political dynamite. It's economic growth. It's lower costs for consumers. It's cleaner air. It's geopolitical advantage. It's a win-win-win in an age where everything around us feels like losing. And yet, most Americans, I'm sorry to report, are not the kind of people who listen to Volts. Most Americans don't know about it. Most economic and cultural elites don't know about it. Most politicians don't really know about it. Even the most powerful politicians, the ones most directly involved with these subjects, do not really get it, not the full extent of it. Why is that? There are lots of things you could point to, including a diseased information environment, but the core reason, in my opinion, is that the clean electrification industry has simply amounted to less than the sum of its parts, politically and culturally. It has miserably failed to tell its own story. It has failed to wield political power to protect its interests. The main trade group representing it, the American Clean Power Association, has a membership almost half composed of fossil gas and spends its time scolding environmentalists and simpering about all of the above. It is pathetic. Clean electrification, the most dynamic and optimistic thing happening in the world today, and yes, I've heard about AI, is somehow a 98-pound weakling in the great American high school when it ought to be prom king. I was recently approached by some folks who say they want to build something better. It is called AMPed, and it is a somewhat disparate set of efforts designed to improve clean electricity's ability to tell its own story, improve relations with lawmakers, and speed deployment. After looking at what they sent me, I have my doubts about whether it is exactly what I wish it were, but I feel pretty confident that it will be better than the status quo. Today, I am talking with the guy at the center of it, Steve McBee. Currently, he runs Huck Capital, a clean energy investment platform, but he has also managed large-scale clean energy businesses and served as a legislative aide in D.C., so he has a pretty broad view of this landscape and has witnessed clean energy's political failures up close. I can't wait to get into it with him. With no further ado, Steve McBee, welcome to Volts. Thank you so much for coming.
Dave, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to quelling all your doubts.
That would be a first. Truly a first.
We have to be ambitious.
I think you might underestimate the vast universe of doubts with which I struggle. Before we get into what you're doing, let's start with a little diagnosis here. Tell us in your own words, describe to us, as you see it, the failure of this industry to, I guess, I don't even want to say punch above its weight, to even punch at its weight. It is punching well below its weight. Tell us why.
Look, I thought the way that you opened up, this podcast, I mean, you ran a perfect sort of marketing and commercial message for where the industry is and where the industry is going. I've been in the industry for 12 years as a company CEO, as an organizer of capital, and it's a difficult moment, but I actually am more optimistic about the energy transition and these markets than I have been at any time since I came into the market. Our products and technologies, they're awesome. And they're getting cheaper every day. They're flying down the cost curve. We have incredible talent that has come into this industry doing capital formation and business building. There's tons of innovation, as you know, in this sector happening not just in the US, but globally. And while there has been capital that has rotated out of this sector, primarily because of the volatility and uncertainty politically, there is plenty of capital in this space to do what needs to be done to get to the next phase of the energy transition. So from a commercial perspective, I'm incredibly optimistic. That optimism is tempered by the fact that I think we have not done a very good job as an industry of taking care of a couple of really important non-commercial responsibilities. Responsibility number one is we are obviously not organized for power. I think the limits of our political infrastructure as an industry, particularly in Washington, have been badly exposed over the past year plus. Sort of connected to that, Dave, given how important our industry is to the U.S. economy, given how important it is to meeting power demand, not to mention how important it is to the planet, our social license should be locked in, but it's not. Our cultural identity is wobbly. And I think that is a function of us not doing a good job as an industry in talking to the people that we most need to be with us in ways that are landing. We talk down to people, we talk around people, we don't speak to people based on their own lived experience or around a common set of values. And as a result, we have really allowed the fossil fuel industry to pretty easily appropriate the energy narrative in the United States.
Well, let me just insert here. They did have a century head start. And all the good news we're talking about has really flourished in the last 3 years, 5 years. So, you can forgive us. You can forgive them for, having more infrastructure in place.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a fair point. It's also an excuse. I mean, we need to be excellent and we need to be urgent about it. And we have not built infrastructure that has made, their job very difficult. And in fact, they have pushed us kind of outside the cultural zeitgeist. And we're on the outside looking in, which is not a place where you want to be in a world where the number one most important political signal is cultural. And the most important market signals, unfortunately, are political. And so I think it's not enough as an industry to say, hey, we're just going to keep our head down. We're going to build great companies. We're going to build great products and we're going to shut the noise off. That's not how it works. The way it works is you have to be commercially excellent. You have to organize and take care of your political power, and you have to fight it out every day for narrative and for your identity. And in a perfect world, we'd not only be excellent at those three things, but we would sort of organize them in a cohesive way to create a flywheel for the industry. But we have not done that. And so I think this topic that we're discussing today, I think it's so important. In fact, I think the most important priority, the very top priority of our industry needs to be being fiercely urgent about getting our political power organized and getting our cultural identity reestablished. If we do those things, these energy markets are going to transition themselves for all the reasons that you talked about at the top of the show. The fundamentals are great. But if we don't take care of those things, it's going to be lumpy.
I have my own thoughts about this, obviously. Before we started, I took a solemn vow to myself to remain calm throughout this episode. Because as you know from our previous discussions,
let's see how that works.
I get worked up about this stuff. But tell us, from your inside view, what lesson do you think these industries, the clean electrification industry, and I just want to, I should have clarified this up front, but I also want to say this. People have in their head energy as a big lump. And I would like to distinguish from that clean energy, but that's also a big lump. And I would like to further distinguish from that clean electrification. Electrons, not molecules, right? Solar, wind, batteries, EVs, etc. That's what I'm talking about. That is the industry that I would like to have a distinct voice of its own. In that industry, what lesson do you think it took from the 2024 election, and how has it chosen to respond?
Again, I would go back to your opening comments at the top of the podcast. I mean, you talked about electrification exactly the way we should be talking about it. That is a way to talk about it that happens to represent the facts of where the industry is today. It also is a way to talk about it that will allow us to reach a broader cross-section of people. And when I think about people,
before we get to how we should talk, I want to hear about what the industry is doing, what people are saying as a response to the 2024 election, what they learned in these back rooms, what strategies are they adopting?
Yeah, I mean, I think you might be giving the back rooms too much credit. I mean, I think that, one of the things that I have found surprising and that I'm very frustrated by is we obviously have a capabilities deficit in the clean energy influence ecosystem. Like the scoreboard would tell you, we're down 53 to zip. We're getting smoked, right? But we also have a cultural problem, I believe, in that ecosystem. The lessons that have been taken seem to be that, we just need to keep doing what we're doing and maybe do it a little better or spend a little bit more money or, whatever. I don't see there is no meaningful conversation within the incumbent group of trade associations and associated firms in Washington about the need for a reboot, about like a really critical look back. There is a lot of time spent resisting new ideas. There is a lot of time spent being territorial to new ideas. And there is a huge amount of time spent by the people who have been charged of protecting and promoting the interests of the industry, trying to convince, I guess, first themselves, but also the rest of it, that the situation is actually much better than people like me and I think people like you think it is. And so I think survival, relevance, sort of digging in, that's what I'm seeing.
Here's how I would put it, Steve. The election was a Trump smacking the industry on the nose with a rolled up newspaper, and the response has been to whine and cringe and beg for scraps, basically.
Yeah.
Let's keep our head down. Let's be safe. Let's not fight. Let's see if we can chisel away a little bit of extras on the side here. You know what I mean? Let's see if we can sneak our way onto the wagon with the rest of everybody. It's just, I never see any self-confidence, any bravado. You know what I mean? It's just like, it just strikes me as an industry that's so used to being on the rump end that it has just accepted it and now decided to beg for table scraps. That is the much less flattering way that I would put it.
That's exactly what it is. And, when we talk about like the cultural problem that this industry we have an identity problem. I mean, when I was trying to figure out after the IRA wipeout, like what's happening, what can I do, who can I help be better? And, what I found, number one, is like, I couldn't find anybody that I thought had the potential to be significantly better the way that they were structured or the way they were being led or the way that they had identified their mission. But the other thing that was equally alarming, getting to the point that you just made, is whether you're talking to lawmakers, whether you're talking to congressional staff, industry leaders, people in the capital markets, people in climate influence, there's this defeatist attitude. There's this sort of idea that like we're used to losing, we're used to taking table scraps. We sort of show up prepared to lose. And, when we do lose, we really talk about how unfair it is that the fossil fuel industry, spends so much money and tells so many lies and they just don't play fair and whatever. And I'm like, and we still show up and talk about ourselves like alternative energy. And I'm like,
yes, it is so characteristic of our side to talk as though there is a referee listening who is going to blow his whistle and intervene. There is no referee.
Nobody's coming to help us. We have to help ourselves, And I think the thing about it is we are we talk about being the future, the the alternative energy that will power the future. The future is fucking here. And we are the power source that's going to power the US economy and hopefully a whole bunch of the world going forward. And we need to show
Yes,
up.
not 2050.
No.
Not 2030.
No.
It's happening now.
Yeah. So, like, where is our swagger? Where is our sort of presumptuousness? I mean, we need to figure out what we need to do politically, and we need to do whatever it takes to go take it. And we just stop asking for permission to do that.
Yes. And here's a point I would make just about human psychology. Like, if you want to attract people to your side, there's two ways you can do about it. You can go to them and flatter whatever it is they already think and try to sort of weasel your way into that and get a little bit on the side. Or you can have some swagger, have some charisma, and attract them to make them come to you because you're the thing, right? Like, make them have to come to you because you've got all the riz, you've got the aura. They want to come be part of your thing. And like, no one in the industry, no one on our side, that doesn't even seem to occur to them that is a possibility, that is even out there in the universe, that you could just like swagger a little bit and then people would be attracted to someone who thinks they're hot shit, right? Like, that's kind of how it works.
That's how it goes.
It's something you said I want to follow up on. The space is full of groups. There are many acronyms. There's the ACP, there's SEIA, the Solar Trade Association, there's ACOR, I forget what that stands for, there's SEEC. There are an alphabet soup of groups in this space. And you say you couldn't find any of them to sort of like had the swagger that you're looking for. So what hole are you trying to fill here? What's missing from all that alphabet soup?
I think there's two things that need to be done. There's the things that we're doing right now that need to be done way better. And then there's the things we're not doing at all. What I've tried to do is focus on the gaps, the things that we're not doing at all. And sort of every day that goes by that we don't start doing them, we're taking deeper losses. And we can talk more about that in this conversation. But, my priorities are better digital communication infrastructure and way better communication narrative and way more cohesion around how we do that. Number two is, your point on all this great stuff that's happening in the clean energy industry. Nobody knows about it really in Washington. Like, what I see every day as an operator in the commercial marketplace and the perspectives that members of Congress have and senators have, even the ones that are way forward on our issues, there's a huge gap in information and knowledge and context about what's actually going on in the commercial market. And then I think third, like, very practically, we got to get more political money in the system because, I spent a lot of time in Washington. Washington's always been very transactional. I've been gone for 12 years. I'm sort of dipping my toe back in, and one of the things
it hasn't gotten less transactional, Steve.
Gotten so much more transactional, and we're not playing that game at all. So those are things that aren't being meaningfully done in any kind of aggressive, disruptive, or intentional way. But we also have to do the basic things that we are doing, that the trade associations are doing, that the green groups are doing. We got to be better. But I think there's so much that is not being done. There's plenty of work to do there as a starting point. And I hope that by bringing better solutions to those gaps in the market, we actually can help the trade associations and those other firms that you mentioned be better, because we're creating a better sort of on the ground environment for them to do the things they do.
Yeah, and you make a point that I think is good to establish here at the outset too, which is that for all the sort of investment that is flooding into this space, there's a lot more out there that is hesitant or waiting or uncertain about entering. And talk a little bit about that dynamic. What's out there and why is it waiting?
I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, this is the thing that I get up at, in the middle of the night thinking about, unfortunately. But I mean, speaking from an investor perspective, there are hundreds of billions of dollars of capital that want to come into this space that is not coming into this space because it cannot price political volatility. It cannot price electoral uncertainty. And, that capital does not feel like the policy signals that are in place at any given time are going to be reliably in place through the hold period of their invested assets. And so as a result, that money is just stranded. And so one of the things that we need to do is we need not just better policies, but we need to make sure that when these rules get written, they stay written. If that happens, a lot of capital is going to come into this space. And I mean, we are so close, per your comments at the top of this podcast, we are close to real domination in this industry. If we get a massive new infusion of capital that is deployed against a set of rules that can be counted on, we're going to rip.
Yes, I try not to dwell on this, but I do think periodically about that capital and about what it would have done if the IRA had been in place for 4 more years.
Yeah.
We would have seen wonders, I think. Okay, so there's a bunch of pieces of this, and I kind of want to take them on one at a time. But I want to start maybe, one of the things you want to set up is a rapid response kind of media operation. But before we talk about what that would look like, I want to talk about what it would say. I want to talk about the messaging and the polling, because this, I think, is where my doubts are concentrated.
Oh, okay, we go. Doubt number 1.
This is where I think I sometimes feel like I'm going crazy because I rarely see my perspective on this reflected out there in the world. So let's talk about it. So you have this polling. You have some polling you've done about these issues. And so before, I should shut up, just tell us what the polling says about the message, about what people are hearing, about what they want to hear, about their preferences, that kind of thing.
You and I might disagree with the findings of this work that we've done. The way I read the research is that people are not against clean energy. People are actually quite a bit more supportive of clean energy than even I expected. But what people don't like are binary choices put in front of them where they're being forced to pick one thing versus the other thing, or forced to take a side. And so I think that's thing number 1. I think thing number 2 is I wake up every morning and work as hard as I can on the things I'm working on because I am existentially concerned about a climate crisis. And that is my motivation, and that is my North Star. I have learned that that is not true of a lot of people. And this research bears that out. I mean, people are not, it would be too severe to say that they're indifferent to climate change, but it just isn't something, it never hits kind of the top 10 things that they wake up every day thinking about. And so I think the way we talk about this, I mean, it was interesting. I was having dinner about a month and a half ago with 4 U.S. senators who are really awesome on these issues. And we were having this conversation exactly. What's our message? And in the room, there was a little bit of a different view between certain members who felt like we should be climate forward and we should not, give up talking about the moral imperative of climate change and the need to build this industry out to address that. And then there were members who were like, we should never talk about climate again. It's all about affordability. And this is a debate that is being had here inside the climate influence ecosystem. And I think it's a false choice. I think that, we have all of a sudden so many ways to talk about this issue separate from climate that can appeal to lots of different people. Talk about it on the basis of price. Talk about it on the basis of affordability. Talk about it on the basis of reliability. Talk about it, in terms of like, hey, clean energy isn't getting blocked, barricaded, or embargoed in the Middle East.
Or how about as a solution to inflation?
As a solution to inflation and high energy prices, 100%. And I just think that as a industry and maybe as a movement, the facts on the ground have not caught up to the messages that we are communicating. I mean, I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you here. When I came into this industry 12 years ago, I came in as CEO of a company called NRG Home. It's a big company, $6 billion company. We had 3 million customers, all on the residential side. About 2.5 million of those customers were retail energy customers. The other half of those customers were buying some combination of our green growth products. And as we were looking about how to drive out market share, how to build a customer funnel that could actually convert, the thing we were really left with 12 years ago is like, we got to go target climate forward homeowners who care about climate change and who are willing to pay a premium for our products, because at the time they weren't cheaper for the most part. They also didn't always work as well as we wished that they would. And there was really, really limited grid services and VPP programs in place that would allow you to go to a customer and say, we can install these products in your home, we can flex those with grid operators, and we create a shared savings model for you. None of that stuff really existed then. So we went after climate forward homeowners. We are in a totally different place today where we have an abundance, like almost an embarrassment of riches, about how we can talk about this industry. And we should be able to touch every single human in the United States with a message that lands, whether that human is sitting in the commercial marketplace as a consumer or sitting in the public square as a voter. We have something for everyone. That is a feature. Like, that's not a bug. That's an opportunity. That's not a problem.
Well, I think you have misidentified the source of my doubts, as many people do. I don't give a damn whether anyone says the word climate or not. That is absolutely not my thing. I'm not one of these people who insist on putting climate forward. I think this is quite obviously true, that if your superiority as a product, as a solution, is overdetermined, it's economic superiority, it's security superiority, it's clean air superiority, it's inflation. Like, obviously, you use whichever one of those arguments is compelling to the current audience you're talking to. That seems obvious to me. What bugs me is this idea that we poll and we find out that if you pose this as a choice, do you want these technologies to replace fossil fuels? People get nervous because they aren't certain whether these technologies are sort of strong enough, big enough, manly enough to really do the full job. So they like addition, they don't like replacement, sort of, right? That's kind of what they tell you on polls, and that's kind of the lesson. And so the question is what you do with that, fact. I mean, and this is like, as someone who has followed issue polls for decades now, I feel like people really misuse them. Like, I'm fine using them for political purposes, but once you start kind of like taking them too seriously, I think you get misled, because like on any issue, if you just ask people, do you want more stuff? They'll say yes. And if you say, do you want fewer things? They'll say no. They don't know anything about anything, right? They don't know any of the details, any of the technologies. They don't have any idea. They're just like, intuitively, more sounds better than less. More choices sound better than fewer choices, right? Like, that's what you're going to get, but that is just puddle deep. So the question is, what do you do with that information? And so I think of it, this is the analogy I was thinking about before we got on the call. It's like if you work for Coca-Cola and you do polling and you find out, oh, the public thinks that, both Pepsi and Coke are part of a balanced diet. That's fine, but you're advertising Coke. Your job is to sell Coke. You don't go out and in your commercial for Coke start by saying, don't worry, we're not replacing Pepsi. Don't worry, you can still have your Pepsi. Like, even if that's true, that's not your job to say that. Your job is supposed to be bragging about how good Coke is, right? You're supposed to make people want to come to Coke and leave Pepsi behind, not because they have to, but because they want to, right? So then to take this messaging and take the lesson to be, oh, we need to talk about all the above. We need to be sure not to sort of threaten fossil fuels. We need to say, oh, we can all fit on this wagon. I just think that comes off as weak. I don't think it cuts through. I don't think it creates the kind of conflict that draws attention these days. I just don't think it is effective. This let us be a junior partner on your bandwagon message. Never mind whether it's accurate. I just don't think it works. I don't think it's a good way of interpreting these findings.
I think that's a really That's a great analogy. And, so we want to be Coke, right? I mean, at least I want to be Coke. I don't want to be Pepsi.
Yes. Amen.
First of all, I just want to just say one thing to the point you made at the top of this question. And it's like, it's obvious to you that we should be sort of organizing our message to match certain audience cohorts. Well,
Yeah.
it may be obvious, but we're not doing it. We're not doing it. Okay. So like, that's thing number one. But on your point, here's how I look at the research. I look at the research saying that public sentiment doesn't want to have binary choices, doesn't want to be forced to sort of, choose between this versus that, doesn't want to be doing things to demonize one side versus the other. They just want it to be easy. They want it to be cheap. They want it to be reliable, whatever. I think the other thing that you see in that research and some other research that we've done, which is specifically targeted consumers of energy, they don't have a lot of information about our industry and about our products and why they are, in fact, cheaper, more reliable, and create more energy security for them and their families. So the public opinion right now is in not a great place for clean energy, and that is on us.
Well, again, like fossil fuels have been, spending billions of dollars for many decades, quite sophisticated operation, convincing people that fossil fuels are strong, manly, tough, steady, reliable, and that clean energy is sort of flittery, kind of nice, kind of cute, and like we'll let some in, we'll put some on the edge, but it can't be the main thing. So I guess what I would just say is like, you either accommodate your message to that, or you try to change that. and the way to change that is by convincing people that clean energy is strong and is reliable and is powerful and can do the job. You don't accommodate yourself to their misconceptions. You try to change their opinion, right? Like that. This is just what never seems to occur to like the whole Democratic side of the aisle, including the clean energy industry, is just like, why don't you try to change this rather than accommodating yourself to this current state of public opinion? Why don't you try to change it?
Exactly right. And I think one of the things I just want to make sure as I try to quell your doubts, one of the things I just want to make sure is that you understand how I read this research. So our job is, in my view, is not to look at where public sentiment is and just sort of say, well, there's only a certain level of tolerance for our stuff or whatever. And so we just have to accept that and do the best we can. Our job is to change the composition of public sentiment. So what the research tried to do was to say, like, where actually are people right now? Where are the opportunities and where are the barriers? Because I see this as a two-step, on the Coke Pepsi thing. I think step number one is we need to talk about Coke and its reliability and its affordability and the fact that, it can get hooked up to the grid faster and the fact that it can allow consumers to have more agency over their power. Like, we need to talk about Coke over and over and over every single day on these terms. And then once we have sort of level set public sentiment, then we need to start drawing a really stark contrast with Pepsi, and we need to be throwing them under the bus every single day in a very intentional, coordinated, cohesive way. I think the only thing maybe we just differ about is I think we have to define Coke before we can define Coke versus Pepsi, and we have not done a good job on that.
Yeah, I totally get that. I totally understand that. I just the reason my hackles are always up about this is because I have heard this, do XYZ and then we'll fight message from this industry, from the political, and the fight never seems to come.
We need some new leadership here because the people who are paid to fight have not fought.
And they seem to define fighting like it's not just that they won't fight, it's that they are constantly filling the newspapers with scoldy op-eds telling everybody else not to fight. Like, they seem to treat fighting as though it's like, you're farting at the cocktail party or something. Like it's gauche, like it's like in DC, it's just not done, like it's wild to me.
That is 100% true in our industry and in the climate influence space, it's true across like the whole progressive movement.
Yes.
So, I don't want to be too obnoxious about this, but like the people I'm working with on this and the way I'm thinking about it, not only do I hope that we can build a better playbook to go and take the fight to the fossil fuel industry and take the message to the people in ways that are going to land, but I hope that by doing that, maybe we can hand that playbook over to some different parts of the progressive movement that could probably take a couple pages, out of a
Yes.
more aggressive, intentional, and tenacious strategy to take on all the bullshit coming from the other side. So,
I would just like to see a plan that doesn't have step one, publicly talk about your own weaknesses and shortcomings, concede all your opponent's arguments. Step one. Step two, beg for scraps.
right.
So let's talk about then one of the initiatives that's coming out of this, calling Signal, which is rapid response media. Anybody who listens to Volts or has ever read anything I've written for 20 plus years now knows that this is my personal obsession. The media imbalance, the toxic information environment, and just the absolute passivity about it on the progressive side, on the side of clean energy, just this refusal to acknowledge the centrality of media in the information space in all of this. So, I can't tell you how many, give me $1 billion and I'm just going to hire, never mind that, give me like
Yeah,
$100,000.
yeah,
I can hire an army of young people to go out on TikTok and YouTube, and just say, man, clean electricity freaking rules. Look at this. Look at how awesome this is. And like that would be like $1.50, for any of these philanthropists, any of these green groups, any of these investors, as you say, there's money all over the place in this area, but they're not spending on media. It drives me crazy. So I was very happy to see this. So what do you envision here?
yeah. The only thing I would quarrel with is to say we are spending money on media, but we're spending money on the wrong media. You mentioned a scolding op-ed in the New York Times. There should be no op-ed in the New York Times. And, all of this centralized TV buying that, the existing groups are doing. We are not talking to people in the places that they increasingly get their information in. To your point, we're not talking through the voices they trust to deliver it. And the thing that sort of inspired this idea initially was actually, we could probably do a whole separate podcast on this, but
Yes.
I have spent 10 years trying to blow up the residential clean energy model, which solar proxies for, which I think has been a disaster for consumers and trust and the industry and all the rest. And so in looking at different ways to reorganize those markets, one of the things in our research that we see is that, first of all, if you're going to sell somebody solar, you shouldn't be knocking on their door during dinner to sell it. But that's how we sell it. When you knock on the door of most people, they are not even showing up open and kind of neutral. That's the best case scenario.
If I hear a knock on my door and I see somebody I don't know at it, immediately
yeah,
I'm angry.
yeah,
Immediately I'm angry, resentful, and I want them to go away. It is unfathomable to me that this is not just a way of selling solar,
it's the
but
way.
the only way we have of selling solar. It's like the 1950s called,
It's just, yeah, it's so frustrating. So that's a whole separate topic. But the point I was making to your question was when consumers are engaged in a selling moment with our industry, they either sort of show up with no information, but more typically they show up with biases against our products. And I was like, part of that is on us. Like we have made a difficult product to sell more difficult by the way that we've organized the market. But the other thing we started doing some more work on, why are people showing up with all this misinformation about what this is? And what we realized is that there are at least, this was about 15 months ago, there are at least 3, I call them air wars being financed and prosecuted by the fossil fuel industry and their allies that are getting way, way up the funnel with customers into their digital and social channels with subtle and not so subtle messages about clean energy being weird and expensive and dangerous and unreliable.
And the chemicals, Steve, the
The
chemicals.
chemicals and the spyware. Yeah, the Chinese, the panels are Chinese spyware. I mean,
Yeah.
right? Like, but the fossil fuel industry, I mean, I guess you have to give them credit because they are getting it done.
Yep.
And nobody is showing up going, I'm really glad you're at my door, but like, I'm really glad you're at my door because I've heard like solar is like this incredible price and reliability driver. And I'm like really interested in talking about how I can put these on my home. Like said, almost nobody that answers the door ever. So, the fossil fuel industry they're playing the game. I find it like ironic and despairing that we are the cool kids in the energy industry. We're the tech forward part of the energy industry. And somehow the fossil fuel industry is smoking us in the new media environment. And they're smoking us as it relates to incepting consumers, and they're smoking us as it relates to incepting voters. And so we got to go take that on. And right now we have no presence, not as an industry and not really as a climate movement in the digital space.
So concretely then, what does it look like to build this? Like, is it literally just like giving money to people and telling them to go out and fight these? Like, practically, how do you build this?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do with this is I'm trying to fill gaps. I think there's 3 gaps here that Signal is trying to fill. Gap number 1 is the gap we've been talking about. We have no position in the digital and social media ecosystem, number 1. Number 2, the industry voice is not meaningfully in the contest for narrative and facts anywhere. And it's not unified in any meaningful way when it does engage. And number 3, the industry efforts to communicate its story to the extent that they exist are siloed from the messages and communications being run by our political allies about, the policy advantages or the policy choices or the policy ideas to advance the industry. So we're not in the game. We're not in the game digitally, and we're not coordinating, with our best allies. So what I'm trying to do, my partner on this, if maybe a lot of your listeners know this group, it's a C3 called Good Power. And, when I was looking for an execution partner for this, I looked at all the for-profit and all the nonprofit entities, and I'm like, Good Power is really getting it done. And what I was most impressed by with them is the way they've used their portfolio of influencers to go into rural red parts of the United States where renewables projects were being held up because there was no community support, for those projects, or there was a lot of disinformation that was in those communities that was making it hard to get those projects approved. And they went out and they said, they put influencers into those markets that looked like and sounded like and felt authentic to those communities, teachers, priests, farmers, right? Moms, like whatever. And, they really moved the needle. And so the way this is going to work, I won't geek out too much on this, but we're using an AI-enabled technology platform, which, like, the best way to think about it is like a little micro network that's being dropped into this campaign. And that network unifies and connects all of its participants on a common platform. And at the beginning of every week, we're going to find 1 or 2 things where we're like, that's a defining moment and we need to show up on time and show up unified. Or this is a thing we'd like to make a defining moment, whatever.
Right. Let me just emphasize both those. Being opportunistic. This is the thing. Like, I remember when I first heard about this, I was like, I've heard about these communications efforts. You remember We Can Solve It? I think that was Al Gore's, or Climate Power. Like, we've had these narrative efforts before, but they tend to be so technocratic and top down and sort of like, as you say, mainstream media centered, and just kind of feel like they're from a previous century. And like, the main thing they're missing is just being opportunistic, being there when things happen. That is what the right is really good at. Anything that happens, they can twist it and put it into their narrative overnight, everywhere overnight. Like, that's the main thing. And then the other thing is creating opportunities, right? And this is, to get back to our previous discussion, what so many people in our world are so nervous and frightened and timid about is creating conflict that draws attention. That is the coin of the realm these days. That is how you get attention. And so to have as a premise of your effort, we're not going to offend anybody or bother anybody or counteract or contradict anyone. No one cares. No one listens. No one pays attention. So on both those sides, the rapid response and the like, where can we create fruitful conflict that will serve an educational purpose? Both those we have been falling so far down on. Hey there, everybody. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you about a new mattress or push a credit card on you. This isn't an ad. There are no ads on Volts. It is supported entirely by listeners like you. If you'll indulge me for a second, I'd like to ask for your support. I started Volts because we're all surrounded by depressing news about climate change and misinformation about clean energy, and it's never been more important to share the stories of the real people on the ground doing the real work of transition and all the ingenuity and courage and public spirit they are bringing to it. People are hungry to hear these stories, to learn from and find inspiration in them. I've heard from people who changed majors or careers after hearing episodes of Volts, people using it in classrooms and community groups, even state legislators who have passed bills inspired by specific episodes. Sharing these stories matters. It makes a difference. If you have found value in it and want to help me continue doing it, I hope you will join the community of paid subscribers at volts.wtf. It's about the cost of a cup of coffee a month. If you don't like subscriptions, you can make a one-time contribution, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, or just tell a friend about Volts. I am grateful for any and all support. If you're already a paid subscriber, thank you. And now, back to the show. So on both those sides, the rapid response and the like, where can we create fruitful conflict that will serve an educational purpose? Both those we have been falling so far down on.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, this is another one of those things that kind of wakes me up and pisses me off in the middle of the night is, I mean, the way we booted the IRA fight, I mean, we actually deserve to be like in Siberia for 10 years, right? I mean, it could not have been executed any worse, but here we are with a huge do-over in the form of like these defining opportunities that seem to show up every single week.
I know,
right? We can message around, and yet, all our messaging is, again, to the extent it exists, is siloed, it's disparate. We take forever to pull it together.
And it's cringy, and it's all of the above, and it's please give us table scraps.
Right.
Here's another analogy. I had the Coke Pepsi analogy, Steve, and then I had one other one I thought that I'm gonna run by you. So on immigration, right? Trump gets elected. All the elites on the left conclude, oh no, immigration's bad now. We got to retreat on immigration. The public is not with us on immigration. Run. Let's chase the right. We'll be tough too. We'll be tough on the border too. Chase. Instead of looking forward, just look up a little bit at the horizon. Look forward a few years to the very, very predictable thermostatic public opinion backlash against Trump. And now, sure enough, immigration is polling better than it has in years. Support for immigration is higher than it has been in years. Now, our side could have gone to where the puck was going, right? We could have just stuck to our guns and then think how good we'd look now, right? We are serious about our values. We stuck with them, and now here you are, public, coming back to us, and we look good. Instead, we look like chiseling little weenies, who have no courage of our convictions. We chase the right, and now we're going to, chase back left again, and now we just look like we have no spine. I see the analogy here, too, which is Trump got elected. Oh no, climate and clean energy is bad now. We got to cringe. We got to run away. We got to talk about all of the above. We got to talk about, anything but what we are and our value advantages. And here comes the Iran war, very predictably, like Trump's messing it all up. And the public is, especially in other countries, but even here is like, gosh, it seems like fossil fuels cause lots of problems and they're coming back our way. And if we had just stood here and not moved in the first place, we would be here to meet them, but instead we're chasing public opinion every time we get a new poll, and it's framed by DC consultants and the DC types and think tank types as that's savvy. That's smart politics. You hippies have your head in the clouds. We're the smart, savvy politics knowers. But instead, if you follow their advice, you just constantly look like a weakling. You constantly look like you have no center, you have no spine. We should have just stuck with our guns in the first place because, as you say, the world is now serving up one example after another that is telling our story for us. And where are we? Where are we out spiking the ball? Where are we out saying, we told you so, right? Like, thank you for coming back. Here we are. We're ready to go. That's what worries me about the poll chasing always. It's
Yeah, and
it's not even that savvy.
Right. And I mean, it's like we're not spiking the ball. I mean, we're not even getting to the line of scrimmage, right? And I think it really hurts, when you think about the jillions of words that have been written about Iran since this thing started, how few of those words have been devoted to crystallizing a choice. But like, we're about to dial up $1.5 trillion defense budget, a 40% increase over the last year's defense budget, riding alongside a $200 billion supplemental to protect our interests in the Middle East, which is energy. I mean, like, has anybody thought about taking 15% of that money and investing it in domestically sourced, low-cost, reliable energy that will allow us to compete against China? But it's not even in the conversation, and look like that's on us. And I think your point is I think you and I share snowboarding as a thing we do. You say you got to go to where the puck is. I'm like, when you're snowboarding, you got to pick a line. You pick your line, right? And then you go and you rip your line, and you don't come off of it because you hit a mogul or whatever. You hit your line, And I think
that's way better. That's a way cooler.
But at some point, like, we have to decide as an industry, what do we actually believe about ourselves and what do we stand for? And we have to go out and articulate that. And we need to do that. And again, I think we have to understand public opinion and understand the fight we're in and understand where our strengths and weaknesses are. And we have to maneuver through that in the right way. But I don't see a difference by being smart and sophisticated about how we do that and being assertive in making the case for our stuff.
Well, let me make a concrete question then about just that. So say you have this digital rapid response signal, you're calling it, set up, it's running, and an IOU comes along, utility comes along, and announces it's building 2 gigawatts of new gas to serve data centers in its territory. Does Signal...
We dial it up.
Go for it? Does it go after that? Does it fight against gas in that instance?
We dial it up. So, I mean, look, the thing about Signal that's cool is it's going to unite a bunch of different industry leaders onto this micro network and practically getting to the speed and agility and velocity comments you made about how the digital media ecosystem works. Like, this platform generates content for its users and in the voice of their social media narratives, pushes it onto their channels. We push all that out in a unified way around the same message, and then we dip into an influencer pool of about 8,500 creators and validators, and we pick the validators and creators that are best suited to amplify that message, and they amplify it outside the media audiences of the participants. So that's how this works. Now, not every industry, in the scenario that you just sort of laid out, not everybody on the channel is going to be down for a fight on gas, right? And so part of what we're doing, I mean, and look, everybody should just I think, again, like, what do you stand for? What do you believe? On the one hand, I also am like, I've been a CEO. I understand fiduciary obligation. We don't want these companies that are great to, put them in a situation unnecessarily where they're exposing themselves to a bunch of political bullshit. But like, in any given messaging opportunity, I'm expecting we'll get 70% participation from the industry participants on the platform. And what we're also going to do is we're going to coordinate what we're doing with what our elected representatives are doing separately. And we're going to try to both amplify their messages and also try to surround what they're doing with our messages. And so
Right.
it's more cohesive because, I mean, right now, if we ever are like in the game on a narrative contest or a defining moment, I mean, it's like we have just cats and dogs running around all over the place doing like little bits and bytes, and it doesn't add up to anything. I mean, the fossil fuel industry, like those guys know how to line up and go get it done. And so we got to be like, we got to build permanent institutional capability that is equal to what we're up against. And we're not going to build that in 6 months, but like, this isn't like a Mars landing. We can build this in 18 months. You know, we can build this so that it's scaling and accelerating way before the next presidential election. Way before.
Well, this is a good segue to the next thing I want to talk about, which is the sort of the capital table, the going after elites version of this. And here's how I would preface this. I mean, I was debating about whether like where to say this, but I'll just say it here. Like, the fact of the matter is that fossil gas and clean electrification are alternatives to one another, right? If you are going to cleanly electrify everything, you are going to drive gas out of heating and cooling. You are going to drive gas out of industry. You are going to drive gas out of electricity generation. It is, in the end, a choice. You got to do one or the other. And so the idea that the main trade association of which these companies are part of is half gas causes me to lose consciousness when I think about it too much. It is the most ludicrous, like I can't believe it's real. It is unbelievable to me that when we go approach lawmakers, when we go send people to testify before Congress, they can't present that alternative. They are prevented by their own trade association, by their own sort of institutional commitments. They're prevented from saying Coke rules and it's better than Pepsi. Choose it instead of Pepsi. They literally can't say that. And in fact, they're writing scoldy op-eds telling us not to say it. So talk about the capital table, because just the idea that clean electrification can just go speak for itself for once is, I think, a huge piece of this. Talk about how that's structured and what it is.
Yeah, man. I mean, first of all, I mean, I think it's probably worth a minute on what you just raised. You know, it's very dispiriting. And, you know, this isn't personal against anybody. I mean, there's a lot of people who are working really hard, right, and trying to get things done. But like, there are structural challenges with some of the most important infrastructure we have in place that is prohibiting them from delivering and from getting what we need to get done. And I think there's two things. I mean, there's the thing you raised, which is, look, I mean, ACP decided that, you know, and look, I said this at the top of the podcast. One thing I am really focused on is building a broader base of support for our products and for our policy agenda so that we have the durability, particularly when it comes to the regulatory signals that we need to draw in the capital that's required to scale these markets. So I'm 100% for, I think it's essential, building bipartisan support for the industry. And I mean, one of the really exciting things that I found over the past 6 months is there are some groups on the center right that are really doing good work, that are really practical, and that are really like, you know, on it. And so I think that like there's a moment here where we might be able to take the political toxicity out of this issue. But I don't believe the way to get bipartisan support is by adding a bunch of utilities and legacy energy companies so that you can get access to those members. The way you do it is by changing the way you talk about your product so that it draws those members and their constituents in. And so I think like a really big challenge we have is the Trump administration. They have established a playing field where it's a knife fight in a phone booth between gas and renewables, and the outcomes are binary. And so you have to pick a jersey. A reversible jersey does not work in this environment. And so, you know, I think that the strategic and structural choices that have been made have compromised our ability to go pick the fights we need to pick and win the fights we need to win. And we have to deal with that. I think the second thing is, you know, trade associations, and this isn't unique to ours necessarily, although I think ours certainly aren't, we're not at an A plus, even relative to,
Steve Sia just elected Tim Pawlenty as their president, like a paced, boring Republican who is absolutely not going to ruffle any feathers, absolutely not going to sell Coke, is absolutely going to lead with I'm friendly to Pepsi. I'm here from Coke, and I want to say, first of all, that I'm friendly to Pepsi.
Right.
It is unbelievably pathetic to me. Our trade associations, I know you don't want to say this and won't say it and maybe even don't think it, but I just think they are pathetic. It is unbelievable how pathetic. They are failing the people in these companies. They're failing the people who are on the ground fighting for this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like there's the structural problem we talked about in how you build your membership, but there's also like a business model problem, which is, these trade associations generate most of their revenue from conferences. And so, they hold a lot of conferences and,
white papers. Maybe one more white paper.
Yeah. I mean, they put out a lot of white papers. They do fly-ins. I mean, it's not that these things aren't important, but putting all of the juice, of your organization into holding conferences where you invite members out to sit on panels where they talk to each other and tell everybody that's already converted what a great job, we're all doing, and then go post it on their socials and go home and feel great about that. I mean, the conferences are valuable. The white papers can, I guess, be valuable. The fly-ins can help, but those are things that are distinct and different from building political power.
Yes.
And establishing cultural identity. And in fact, I would say, and this is why I'm in the gaps here, I'm focused on political power and cultural identity. And I think if we make those things better, then all the things that those trade associations are trying to do will be easier for them because their success depends on our political power and our cultural buy-in.
But it would be helpful if they didn't lead with the message. Don't worry. Don't be alarmed at us. We're not trying to build any political power. We're no threat to you. Everybody just calm down. We're no threat. That's just, again, misreads what works, I think.
Yeah. And we can have an honest conversation here, within this community about what's working and what's not working. And we don't have to make it personal and we don't have to, but we need to be honest about what's working and what's not working. And we need to be urgent about disrupting or replacing the things that aren't working with solutions that will work. And I think that we need not only some different organizations, but we need different business models. We need different revenue models. We need a different set of parameters that are tied to building our power, locking in our cultural identity. That's what needs to be done. And, I think we're struggling to have that conversation because I think people aren't being real about what we need to do here. I mean, our goal as an industry, at least my goal as a person in the industry, is to replace fossil fuels with renewable power, if not entirely, heavy majority within 10 years. That is a really ambitious goal. I mean, that is one of the most ambitious things you could possibly dream up to do. It's actually doable. But if we're going to do that, we need to have the tools and capabilities in place that are equal to that objective. And if we're not going to be willing to build what needs to be built to enable that goal, we should change it because we're not going to hit it with what we have now. We're not.
Okay, so this capital table, the problem that you've diagnosed is that lawmakers, even the lawmakers who are friendly, are getting their information about what's happening in this space via intermediaries who are not doing a very good job. And one of those intermediaries, while we're throwing elbows all over the place, one of those intermediaries is the big green groups. The default, I think, for a U.S. senator, if they're well, what's going on with solar and batteries these days, is they call one of the big green groups, or they call one of these weak-kneed trade associations. And so you want to solve that problem by getting them information direct. So talk about how that's going to work.
Yeah, and I mean, on the green groups, look, I'm sure there are things they could do better. There are things I'm sure they think they can do better. But, I don't really fault the green groups. I actually fault us, the industry, for forcing the green groups to pick up slack that really should be our responsibility.
Yes, they're supposed to solve climate change. They're supposed to advance this industry. They're supposed to change public opinion. And like, maybe we could just like let them just defend the environment and maybe like have other groups do the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the green groups have a hugely important role to play here. I think that there is a ton of stuff that they do that they just are excellent at. But like in the IRA fight, we had green groups running around and talking to members of Congress about like why batteries and solar and PJM that should not be their job. And because we have not done our job,
right,
they have had to pick it up. And so what I am trying to do here with Amped is to say like, hey, we as an industry need to own our lane. We need to own it. We need to own the responsibility. We need to be excellent at it. We need to like let the green groups go back into their lane where they're excellent. And then these two lanes can coordinate and they can run concurrently and merge onto a super highway, that'll propel the industry forward. So I actually really don't fault the green groups for this. I really put that on us, on the industry, on the people that represent the industry. We have to do better. And so the capital table is one way to do that. I think the thing that motivated this is I had a group of investors, 10 or 12 investors or so, in New York at Climate Week with a half a dozen, members of Congress. And it was a 1-hour meeting. It was no intermediaries, no Washington people, no lobbyists, right? It was just principals talking to principals and an off the record Chatham House rules conversation. And I just basically opened up the meeting and said like, hey, we've got the people in this room that are setting the policy signals. And we have the people in this room that are underwriting investments and allocating capital against those rules. We're all trying to achieve the same thing here, which is a fast and orderly energy transition, but we're in different lanes and we need to understand each other better so that we can work together more efficiently. And I just let the conversation roll. And I mean, first of all, it was a 1-hour meeting that went almost 3 hours.
Which is not like, speaking of principals, these are, busy people. They do not sit around for 3-hour meetings unless they care.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like, a lot of my investment friends I brought into this, I kind of had to drag them in and then I had to drag them out, because it was rich. And I think, the thing that kept happening in that discussion was members kept saying, I had no idea about that. Or I did not know that. If I had known that, maybe we would have done this. Or like now knowing that, I might go do that. And at one point, one of the members of Congress, who will go unnamed, stood up and said, guys, where the fuck has all this information been? and he's like, and he wasn't critical. He was like, we're not getting this.
And that's when the investors said, sir, have you heard of Volt?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Why aren't you listening to Volt? But no, it's like a bit of a light bulb moment. Like and this is on us. I mean, we have not done, and look, I spent 10 years on Capitol Hill. I started and built one of the biggest lobbying firms in Washington. I understand as a person who has made policy and influenced policy that policy gets made all the time with insufficient information. Like that's how it goes. But
to say the least.
But I have been really alarmed at how thin the intelligence layer is, particularly in Washington, when it comes to on the ground commercial dynamics in the marketplace in our industry.
And what I think is evidence of that? I wanted to make this point too. Like, I think kind of we've got a bunch of Democrats to say the words now that clean energy is cheaper. They'll say the words. But as you say, their level of understanding and depth of knowledge is so shallow that if they run into any political backlash or any barrier, they immediately resort to stuff like freezing the gas tax or like freezing electricity rates or just these sort of gimmicky, sloppulist solutions that clearly reveal that they don't really believe it, right? They don't really know it in their gut. They don't really believe it in their gut because they can be scared off it at the slightest, rustle in the bushes.
Right. And I think that part of that is like because they're not getting consistent, complete, comprehensive, data driven information on the regular that can build that conviction in their gut. And I think, like maybe I'm just Pollyanna ish about this. I know Washington is a very cynical place, it's a very transactional place, but like I believe ideas still matter and information still matters and has currency. And I think it is not okay for us to complain about members being squishy on our issues or being opposed to our issues or whatever if we haven't supplied them with the full complement of information. If we give them all the information and they look the other way, then we should be going after them in a very muscular way. But like until we have provided them with all of the data, it's not really fair to criticize them for not being with us. Like we got to help them be with us by giving them the data and the information that builds conviction. We're not doing that right now. And so this capital table, it's designed to do that. And it's going to be bipartisan. We're going to meet with both sides of the aisle. We're going to meet with members of the House and the Senate. This is not lobbying. This will not be registered to lobby. There will be no lobbying done in these meetings. This is about filling up the information bucket and getting the right framework and the right supporting information into the hands of the people that have to make these calls policy-wise.
So who's in that room? Is it CEOs? Is it investors? Who's at this table?
Yeah, it's a mix, but I'm organizing it in a way that over-indexes to the capital markets, to the investors, because I think the investor perspective here is really valuable, and I think it's missing from the conversation. Like an investor who's investing across the clean energy economy is going to have one, if you're investing big green pools of capital, you're investing in like residential solar and you're investing in green steel and you're investing in climate SaaS, right? And so you have the benefit of looking across the whole market, and it gives you incredible pattern recognition that allows you, I think, to provide a perspective that is different from a company CEO who's sitting in one lane of one market. Similarly, I think, that CEO in one lane of one market, they're going to come to Washington and they're going to talk to members of Congress about the thing that impacts their business because that's their job. If you're an investor, back to what we talked about, what you really want is stability, predictability, consistency,
Right.
so that you can allocate capital and feel like you've got the political volatility and the regulatory variability properly sort of risk managed. And so I think that perspective is something that can be very enriching to this conversation. And that voice is not really shown up so far. And so we're going to try to make sure we have a lot of that represented in the room, but we're going to have company CEOs as well.
Well, I think you could probably understand how some people on the grassroots level, some sort of clean energy activists, et cetera, can look slightly askance at the notion that basically capital is going to lead the communication effort with lawmakers because, they can obviously give market information to lawmakers, but there's a lot of perspectives that they're not going to share. So I get one question is like, who gets in this room and are they paying to do so? Are there membership fees? Who's funding all this?
Yeah, right now we're just trying to open up the conversation. And I think, this isn't the only conversation on these topics that are going to be held. Again, I'm like looking at gaps, right? And I just see a gap in the market. I mean, and again, like investors and private equity guys are, not exactly the most sympathetic figures right now for really good reasons. But like, the people I work with in the capital markets who are building the, energy transition marketplace, I mean, they're trying to put a lot of capital to work. They're trying to have conversations that get things structured in a way where they can deploy a lot of capital. And like we should be doing everything we can to make that as achievable for them as possible. And so, it's not maybe this is where it's to use the term you hate so much, all of the above. I mean, it's all of the above. We need all the voices from the different parts of the market in the conversation. And that's business people, that's investors, that's, Washington people. I mean, we all need to be supplying information and making sure people have what they need to make good decisions. And so this is really just designed to do that and to try to do that better.
Having gotten a little bit of a close-up look, I mean, as you say, the sort of background level of knowledge among lawmakers about the burgeoning clean electrification markets efforts is pretty low. Is it high anywhere? Is there anyone up there who is listening to Volts or the equivalent, who is tapped in to the day to day, who is communicating with their peers maybe in a helpful way? Are there champions?
Yeah, like, look, there are. So, and I'm not trying to,
And do you want to name some names?
well, I mean, I know that you know Sean Casten very well. I mean,
Oh,
Sean
yeah.
Casten's excellent. I think Senator Heinrich is excellent. I think Senator Schatz and White House are excellent. I think Pete Welch is excellent. I mean, these are people who are very forward on our issues and they're very tuned in. The thing about it is, though, I mean, they have a lot of knowledge. They have more knowledge than, most. They want more knowledge and more information. That's why I think there's a gap here. Like, as an industry, we have to play the cards that are available to us. We're not going to build political power like crypto does because we don't have $200 million to go drop into, into political races. Like, we don't have that. And we're not going to have that for a while.
But do we spend the money we do have
Well, no, we don't.
on races? Do you know what I mean? Like, we could do more than we're doing, it seems like.
We don't need as much, but we just need enough. But the point I was making is, let's lead with our strengths. One of our strengths is, like, we can't control the fact that we're going to get outspent, 30 to 1 or whatever. We can control how we spend the one, but we can't control what they're going to spend. We can't control what the other side's going to say and the lies they're going to tell and the distortions they're going to put out there. But we can control how we respond to them, and we can control being excellent at the things that we have big advantages on. I think, going all the way back to the top of this conversation, like, one of our advantages is the facts, right? Like, the facts of renewable
reality.
Energy. Yes, the opportunities and the facts and the way our stuff solves for a lot of things that are politically vexing, like affordability, that are important for our country from a competitive perspective. And so, like, we should be 100% A+ students in supplying those facts, that information, that perspective, that data to the people who we need to have it. And we're not 100%. We're like 62%. And so we should go be excellent at that. That's a thing that we have a big advantage on. And we're not optimizing it.
So there's still one sort of bucket we haven't even touched on yet. And this is the bucket. It's kind of like, raise my eyebrow a little bit. Don't totally get how this fits with everything else, but maybe you can explain it. This is the finance play, the finance piece of this, TAC. Maybe I'll just let you explain. What is that?
Yeah. So one of the things that is frustrating to me, we have as an industry, we have like about $1 trillion of capacity that's either installed or that's sitting in the queue waiting to be installed. Like, that's a lot of capacity, but we are not leveraging, we're not organizing and leveraging the throw weight of our industry in ways that not only could be better deployed to build our political power, but I think could be brought in to solve market bottlenecks that are holding back the energy transition. And so one thing I'm really trying to think about, like, again, I don't mean to keep coming back to our trade associations. They have a lot of members in those trade associations. They're organizing them, for their conferences and their fly-ins. I think we could organize the industry on a whole range of public-private initiatives that happen outside of Washington that could really help speed things up. So transmission is like the first area I'm starting on this. I mean, everybody wants to build more transmission, and everybody knows we're not building transmission nearly fast enough. And so I've tried to do a lot of those deals, and there's lots of problems with them. But a common problem in every one of these projects is that the borrowing costs for transmission developers are super high because utilities cannot buy transmission capacity until those lines are energized. It's not like going and buying a 20-year PPA on a utility scale solar project or whatever. The lines have to be energized before utilities can purchase the capacity on them. And so for developers, you're holding all that merchant risk through the period of building those lines. And so your borrowing costs are really high, and it's hard to make the cost of capital work through the project period.
And there's the risk not to tell you something you already know and the audience probably already knows too, but there's also the risk that it's just like there's 5,000 veto points. Every community, every state, anybody, every utility, anybody, anybody practically can sink the whole thing. And that's just an enormous amount of risk if you are deploying large amounts of capital.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm out here in Washington today. Before I jumped on this podcast, I just did a panel with Citi and Macquarie Capital and some other folks at the CRES annual conference on this exact topic. And we were all just up there pleading for certainty and a fixed set of rules so that those things that you just mentioned wouldn't happen. But what I think is there's some cool things that could be done, like to help mitigate some of this. And I have talked to, some large green infrastructure funds about this idea. Like, we could go to a state that's trying to build transmission, and we could sit down with the governor, and we could sit down with the utility leaders, and we could, bring in the capital providers and the transmission developer and say, listen, this capital provider is going to buy $1 billion of capacity. And it's going to hold that capacity while the lines are being built, and then it will sell that capacity at a markup to the hyperscalers and the utilities that want to buy it once the project is concluded, which will allow you to get a cost of capital that makes these projects work, and we can start building these stuff really.
That sounds a little bit like the advanced market commitment that everybody's...
Yeah, I mean, like Jane Flegel has a derivative of this idea that I think is really cool. But like, basically, at least my derivative of this idea is you say to those local officials, hey, the capital wants to do this, but holding that merchant risk starts to strain their investment parameters from a risk perspective. So help us just offset that risk a little bit. Like, the state could take 20% of the first loss exposure. The utilities could say, hey, you know what? All of the wires that are financed by this pool of capital, we're going to give it a fast track approval process so these projects get built as quickly as possible. And the utilities could also say, hey, we can't contractually obligate ourselves to buying this capacity, but we can put an option on it that shows intent. Then you start squeezing the risk down to a place where like those infrastructure funds can play. And if you did that, you'd lower the borrowing costs for the developers, the shit would get built, the hyperscalers and the utilities that need it would get their power. You would create a new asset class for green infrastructure because you could replicate that across the country. And for the local political leaders that help cut that deal, like, they're printing political equity because they've got fast, cheap, reliable green power flowing through the state or flowing through that region. So I just think these are things like we have to get creative about how we put policy structures in place that can help this stuff move faster. And so getting the industry organized to sort of post up, because, you could only cut that deal. And the reason I think Amped could cut that deal is it's a nonprofit.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask, like, there are green infrastructure funds all over the place. There's a lot of entities around in this space. Like, what is the value add for?
Yeah, it's hard to do the deal. I mean, I couldn't go in there as Huck Capital. I could convene everybody, but because Huck Capital has a profit motive, it would be hard to do the deal. If you don't have a profit motive and you're just trying to get the deal done, you can get the deal done. But you also need, in addition to having the right structure, you also need to have the industry standing behind you. And this is where, if I were to build a trade association, the models I would use, I like the NFL's commissioner's office, right? Which until like 6 or 7 years ago was a C6 trade association. Those 32 NFL teams, they organized behind the commissioner's office, and Roger Goodell had the throwaway to sit down across the table and cut those TV deals, cut the branding and licensing deals. You look at like AARP, an amazingly effective trade association. They have a commercial arm called AARP Commercial Services, which cuts all the deals for all those services that their members get at a discount. And it generates billions of dollars for that trade association, and it funds most of their operating capital. So there are really cool and innovative things that you can do if you can get the industry consolidated in a way that provides you a viable counterparty to make things like the transmission example happen. I'm excited about that. I think those are real opportunities. And given how dysfunctional the policymaking process is in Washington and how uncertain it is, like, we have to try to find ways to be more creative outside of Washington to use public mechanisms to get rid of some of these bottlenecks. And I think there's a lot of different things you could do. The transmission example is just one of them.
Okay, so those are the main pieces. There's digital rapid response. There's this sort of elite to elite play, this capital table, so that lawmakers can get intel directly from the source. And then there's this sort of effort to structure public private partnerships to de risk some of these big investments so that capital can get cheaper and more capital can come in. Is that sort of the landscape thus far? That's what AMPT is doing thus far.
Yeah, I think you're not only a great marketer for the clean energy industry, but you've got the AMPT talking points down. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's what it is. And like, those are the three areas we're starting. And this is AMPT is, I mean, we have an LLC, we have a C3, we have a C6, we're waiting on a C4. One of the things that I think is challenging about the way things are structured currently is, you lock into one of those things or the other, and those are the things you can do, or the things you want to do, you have to do in the construct of, what one structure versus another allows. I think we need to be mission forward, problem solving focused first, and then make sure that we have a structure that works best to go solve that problem as fast as possible.
Yes, I think what you're sort of implied here, but I'll just surface it, is just that the standard here in the advocacy community is C3, which creates all kinds of, I think, perverse incentives and limitations, among other things. Like, among the things C3 can't do is lawmaker comes along and says, screw you, clean electrification industry, I'm voting against you. A C3 can't then say, all right, we're going to come take your head off, right? We're going to come beat you in a primary. We're going to come make an example of you and scare the crap out of the other lawmakers. That very, very basic piece of political power and influence is just utterly missing from this space. I don't think any lawmaker in any state or federally is scared of this industry.
Yeah, I mean, and
are you going to try to make them scared? Like, that's what
yeah,
I
mean, no fear is no respect. No respect is no leverage, and no leverage is no outcome, right? So, I think that's another thing that is not being done well. And I think to the point of what you were saying though about the C3 and the limitations, I think you need the right. There's a lot of jobs, and you need the right tool for the job. And I think you don't want to be job limited because you only have one tool. I think one of the things that the fossil fuel industry does so well, unfortunately, is they operate with an incredible amount of cohesion, right? They dial in their communications, they dial in their politics and their political power, they make themselves feel commercially felt, and then they organize those things in a way that is so well coordinated that you just feel like you're sitting in surround sound from all the stuff that they're doing. And so we need, the reason I'm sort of building AMPT this way is we need those kinds of flywheels that can coordinate across activities and get the leverage that comes from a more integrated approach to these things. And I think that that's really missing, right from the market. And so I hope we have a better mousetrap here, because we definitely need some better mousetraps.
Your model is we need to build support for Coke before we explicitly go out and try to kill Pepsi. Right. And I guess I just want to know, like, when, because this fight between clean electrification and gas, I feel like, the ACP is outselling the notion that there is no such conflict. We can all win. We can all win together. It's all growth. It's all extra. No one has to fight. No one has to choose. But it's just, if you look at the physics of it, if you look at the market of it, if you want to decarbonize, yes, you do eventually have to choose. And maybe it is the case that clean electrification does not currently have the political juice to take that fight on directly. But when will it? I mean, if you want to replace most gas in 10 years, 10 years is not a long time. When will we be able to really join that fight?
Well, I'll answer that question and then ask you one back because I'd be interested actually in what you think about this. So this is a non-consensus view, I'm sure, and and it could be wrong. I'm wrong all the time. So, but what I feel here in talking to lots of people in Washington, including, like I said at the top, some groups that are doing really good work from the center right. What I feel is that at a moment that kind of feels on the one hand like the most hyper partisan and political moment ever on energy, and where we've got the administration doing everything they can to wreck this industry and bury it. Outside of the administration, I feel like there is maybe the best chance we've had in a decade.
I mean, as you say, the world is like,
Yeah.
We're not trying to tell our story, but the world is like the world is trying to do it for us.
And these members, they're going home and they're getting beaten on affordability, and they're getting beaten on about the grid being blacked up. They're getting beaten on about Iran and all this stuff. So the point I would make here is I think it would be a mistake to squander a moment, if we think that moment exists, to establish a center political coalition for these issues. I think the best way to do that, to take that shot, is to really hammer the benefits of Coke.
Right.
Because I think if we come out and we start just sort of talking about Coke versus Pepsi, people that want to come home, we might make it really hard for them to come home. And so I'd like to leave a lot of green grass to bring conservatives to us on this issue. And I think talking about Coke is like the way to do that. If we are successful in doing that, Pepsi is going to flip out, and they're going to do the things they do. They're going to spend money. They're going to tell lies. They're going to distort and all the rest. And we will have to really be on our shit if that happens, because that's where the fight will be. But I really think we have such a great story to tell about this industry. I think it can appeal to a broader cross-section of people who currently support this industry. And I think if we could achieve that, it would be the most important thing we could do, because we could get policies in place where the rules are fixed, they transcend our electoral volatility, we get the capital off the sidelines, and we build the shit out of the energy transition. Like, if we see a window to do that, I think we should take it. I see that window. Like I said, I could be wrong. I'd love to know what you think about that. But I think we get there by talking about Coke. And then once we've got a broader coalition, we drop the Pepsi hammer.
I love that we've taken my analogy this far. No, I mean, I think that's probably right. I mean, I'm not, as much as the denizens of DC would like to dismiss all clean energy partisans like me as woolly-headed, unrealistic, unsavvy hippies, I'm not dumb. I get that most lawmakers, most centers of power currently do not get this, or do not have confidence that clean electrification can do the job on its own. And not only that it could be as powerful and reliable, but that this is an upgrade to the grid. Like, that's the story. This is better. It is more reliable. It is cheaper. Like, it's better on every metric. And so I do think, yes, we need swagger. We need people to want, instead of clutching their Pepsi to their chest out of fear that someone's going to take it from them, we need people to be voluntarily setting down the Pepsi and going to pick up a Coke because, damn, look how good Coke looks.
Like that was my you articulated it much better than I could have. But that was the question I was going to ask you. Like, I have this view that we can widen the coalition. I have this view that we can do that by talking about our products, on the basis of the facts about them and their their price advantage, the reliability.
But I would say, we need to also be able, the things they're doing on energy. I mean, this Iran war, even critics of the administration, I don't think, it is genuinely difficult to wrap your head around how stupid it is. Even establishment Democrats, I think, on some level, are trying to sort of generate justifications for this because they can't wrap their head around how arbitrary and stupid it is all the way down. It's all negative effects all the way down. No one's winning this except China. No one is benefiting from this. So, but they are not paying the price they ought to be paying for that. They're not, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they're still out on TV talking about, I mean, Doug Burgum's still in front of Congress talking about somebody, it's a lawmaker challenged him, like China's building, 500 gigawatts. He's of this, and this. And he's like, well, base load or variable, it's still like the sun goes down at night stuff. Like just the crudest sort of like, they ought to be paying a price for that. They ought to be mocked in public. People ought to be making the point that like they are violating their own goals. They're making things less reliable, more expensive, et cetera, and they're just not paying that price. So in addition to boasting about Coke, somebody needs to be out with a shiv hurting people who do stuff like this. Do you know what I mean? There's got to be an enforcement arm. We need some thugs, you know what I mean? We need some people who are going out and like whacking people over the head. I don't know if it's all got to be the same group of people. Do you know what I mean? But like, we need that side of things.
Yeah. And I mean, again, maybe this is just too precious, and you can call me on it. But like, I think you can actually do that 100%. Like this situation in Iran is just a huge opportunity for us to redefine the stakes, and we're not doing it. But I also think, what was in that big, beautiful bill, I mean, it was the inverse of the policies that you would put in place if you were trying to achieve the goals the administration had laid out for it, right? Like we were basically like taking all of the cheapest, most ready power that's sitting in the queue ready to go. And instead of hooking that up, we like took all the incentives away. We gave all these new incentives to gas and fossil fuels. We pushed that stuff to the back of the line. We cut the line with gas and I guess coal. Right?
Coal.
So all of a sudden, like you're not getting power that's cheap or reliable or ready. And, and so I think there needs to be accountability for those choices. And I think you can enforce accountability by contextualizing the case for Coke and like, not get it into a situation where like, it's so overtly, I mean, it's just the facts. I mean, the goals are not aligned to the policies. And so we have an alternative where the policy, we all agree with the goals, more energy, faster energy, cheaper energy, energy for AI, energy to beat China. But we have to have policies that are synchronized to the goals, and we don't. So, I mean, I think that's not only something that's fair game, I think it's like pretty essential that we just make the case. And I think in the IRA fight, the thing that was really frustrating to me, I mean, like we have like 3 times as many batteries in the queue as we do gas projects.
I know, it's wild.
And like we never ever, I felt like if we were organized, what we should have said or what we would have done in the IRA battle is to say, hey, this isn't a tax. We're not making tax policy. We're making energy policy. And we are resetting energy policy in ways that's going to make it harder to get cheap, reliable, and fast power onto the grid by these choices. But like, we never made that case. We never forced people to have a real choice there on like, geez, like, do we really want policies that do this? Well, maybe we need to think about this in a different way. We never presented an alternative. Never.
Okay, well, as I said, we could talk forever, but I should probably wrap it up. I think we tested people's patience. Maybe just like, is this effort the kind of thing that the public can engage with at all, or is this mostly an elite play? Which I don't mean negatively at all. Like we desperately need elite plays, but I just wonder: is there a public participation? Can people follow along? Like, is there a public facing?
Yeah,
part
there's
of this?
going to be. I mean, again, I think one of the things that I'm really aware of is back what we talked about at the beginning. Like, there's a lot of resistance to new things. So if you're going to bring something new in, you need to make sure you can rock it, and you got to make sure that you can prove it, right? And so I want to do things that get traction, to get proof points, that create confidence, and then we're going to, we have a very ambitious plan to scale this platform into something that I think can stand up and be heads up to API and the fossil fuel industry, juggernaut, but we're going to do that in a linear way and not come in and get totally over our skis, on day one and open ourselves up to all kinds of criticism. So these things we're doing on communications, on market making, on sort of like strengthening the intelligence layer, these things to me are super critical. And we got our hands full doing that, for the next 4 or 5 months. But yeah, there's going to be a way for the public to engage on this in lots of different ways going forward. But we're going to try to start out here and try to be successful on the things that we think are really important right now and where we can do something about. And then we'll go from there.
All right. Well, above all, thank you for recognizing the smoldering, embarrassing failure around you and not blowing smoke. You know, if I hear another clean energy person try to tell me that the OPPP wasn't really so bad because there's this one tax credit on page 12 that didn't totally get nuked, I'm just like, let's be real with ourselves. So thank you for being real and thank you for trying to build something. And maybe we'll reconvene in a year or two and see how it's going.
I hope so. I hope I quelled some of your doubts. And I guess I would just say, because you got a lot of really influential people that listen to your podcast, I want people to feel like we can be excellent and not settle, right? We can't settle for a C. We need an A. We have everything we need to go do that. So let's go be great. Let's go be great.
Well, yeah, that's what'll call my doubts is if you go do it. All right.
Dave, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I would say thanks to you. This is such a killer podcast. And you do just a ton of good on this podcast, and it's really a privilege to be on. So I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for listening to Volts. It takes a village to make this podcast work. Shout out especially to my super producer, Kyle McDonald, who makes me and my guests sound smart every week. And it is all supported entirely by listeners like you. So if you value conversations like this, please consider joining our community of paid subscribers at volts.wtf, or leaving a nice review, or telling a friend about Volts, or all three. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.